Hi Year Sevens, hope you're keeping well. It was good to chat to you guys on Parents' Evening, but a lot of the feedback was that you found the air masses lesson quite tricky. So we're going to go back through that and make sure you get a really good understanding of that. As always, we're going to start off with your title. Write this down in your books. So recapping air masses, write that down in your book. And then 2 recap questions. So your first one is name 2 tools with which we can measure the weather. Okay, so thinking back to your how can we measure the weather lesson, what were 2 things we used to do that? And then your second one, think about your first unit this year, define the terms rural and urban. Okay, so pause the video here and then you can move on when you've written your answers. Okay, well done. So you should have done your answers. 2 examples of things we can use to measure the weather. A rain gauge is used to measure the rainfall, and a weather vane measures the wind direction. So it changes directions depending on where the weather comes from. The rain gauge just gathers how much rainfall there is so that we can measure the amount of rain. Rural areas are areas of countryside, so very or more sparsely populated, so there's fewer people who live there. Urban areas are cities. We've got much more people living in cities than we do in rural areas. Okay, so double check your answers. Add a bit of green pen to make sure you've got your full answers if you don't feel you've got those. And then we'll start looking at our air masses lesson. To get you in the mood for our lesson, I'm going to start you off nicely with a quick Mr. Bishop geography joke. So, what did one raindrop say to the other? 2's company, 3's a cloud. Cloud, 3's a crowd. Crowd. Yeah, thank you. Okay, good. So, what we want to do is to think about the global pattern of climate, and we've looked at this a little bit, and you guys should be familiar with some of the ideas in here, but we want to think about how does temperature vary with latitude. So remember we talked about lat is flat, latitude is the distance away from the equator. Okay, so how far north of the equator we are or how far south of the equator we are. And this is a beautiful map from Ventusky, and they show you all sorts of different things, but this map in particular shows you how temperature varies, and you know how it varies because on the side you've got a key here. Okay, so have a look at the key. Different colors mean different temperatures. Just be aware that there are minus numbers here as well. Okay, so you need to pay attention to those. So have a look at this map, have a think about what's going on, and on the next slide I'm going to get you to do a little bit of work in your books to think about what actually is going on with our temperature. Okay, so we want you to think about this idea of how does temperature vary. So in your books I want you to write down what happens to temperature as we get further north or further south of the equator. Where are the coldest areas on our map? So think about the pattern. So P for pattern. In your paragraph you're going to write a P for pattern. Then you're going to quantify it. You're going to say, generally speaking, what statistics can we use? So could you say a specific place and what temperature it goes to? And then you're going to think about any exceptions. So P for pattern, Q for quantify, and E for exceptions. So are there any exceptions to the pattern that you can see as you get further away from the equator? Okay, so pause your video now, and then we will rejoin when you have finished your work. Okay, well done for that. So you should have seen that as we get further away from the equator, generally speaking, the climate gets colder. You might have used some statistics in terms of saying some areas of North America in Canada are down to -40, parts of Greenland very, very cold, or parts of Europe as well, pretty cold too. And then you might have said along the equator, places like Kinshasa or Lagos, up to sort of 40 degrees. Okay, those are the things we want to see in your answers. Exceptions, well, there are a couple of exceptions. In fact, England is an exception, where we get warm air water coming from the Caribbean, and that's why along this latitude you can see that actually England is much, much warmer than other areas at the same latitude. Okay, and that area of warm water is called the Gulf Stream. It warms us up. Okay. So just to do a little bit more in detail about this, I want you to pick 4 different sites from here. So I've asked you to look at Moscow, and Moscow is over here. I want you to look at Istanbul, down here, to look at star number 2 and star number 1, and tell me what temperature each of those sites are. So write those down in your books, pause the video. What temperature is Moscow, Istanbul, star 2 and star 1? Okay, so write those down in your books. Okay, well done. So you've probably noticed that the weather in Moscow is much colder, or the climate in Moscow is much colder compared to Istanbul. And the reason I've asked you to do this is because that's where our air masses come from. Okay, so generally speaking, they're going to come from a number of different directions, sort of the east, the northeast, southeast, southwest and northwest, and those are going to bring us different climates, and that is what our air masses are. So in your books, I'd just like you to write down a mini title, what is an air mass, and then write down where an air mass is come from is what an air mass is. Okay, so, or sorry, where the air is coming from is what an air mass is. It is a large body of air that is usually thousands of kilometers long and determines the weather that we get. Okay, so you can see here a more detailed picture of our climate. We're going to look at these in a minute. Okay, so I'll pause the video, take that down, and then we'll look at what kind of weather these air masses are bringing us. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples of where our air masses come from. Okay, and I want you to think about what kind of climate are they bringing. Now remember, if it's coming from continental areas, it's bringing drier weather. If it's coming from maritime areas, so the sea, it's bringing wetter weather. Okay, and then we've already said that from the north it's bringing cold air, and from the south it's bringing warm air. Okay, so for our first one, I want you to have a look at this one. So in your books, you might write down in full, you're going to say, when the air is coming from the north, this is going to bring, and in this particular case you would say, this brings very cold weather from the Arctic, because it's coming directly from the north, from the Arctic, and it's coming from the sea, and so it's going to bring cold, wet weather. Okay. Okay, your second one, so I'll give you a minute to write that down, pause the video, and then we'll get on to your second one. Okay, so your second one is coming from the east of England. Okay, so have a think about what that's going to bring us. Okay, so we've said from continental areas, think about what type of weather that's going to bring. Okay, so I'll give you a minute to do that, and it's coming from slightly north, so think about what other kind of weather it is. So we're thinking, is it bringing hot or cold, and dry or wet? Okay, so pause your video, write down when the air is coming from the northeast, it's going to bring, and tell me what weather it's going to bring. Okay, so your next one is thinking about if it's coming from the southeast. Oh goodness, yeah, southeast, that's right, I'm getting myself confused. From the southeast, what kind of weather is it going to bring us? Remember, it's coming from the continent and it's coming from the south. Okay, so pause your video, write down if the wind air mass is coming from the southeast, it's going to bring. Okay, well done. So I'm going to leave the next ones for you to do on your own. Okay, so coming from here and coming from here. Remember, we're thinking about, is it continental or maritime? Is it coming from the north or the south? And combine those different ideas. Okay, so pause the video, complete those arrows, and tell me what's going on. Then we'll have a look at the answers. Okay, so Arctic maritime properties, it's wet and cold, we mentioned that. So during the winter we get snow coming from that air mass. At the moment we have a very cold season this week, and that's bringing us some very cold weather from Europe, and so it's bringing us this cold air that we've got. Tropical continental brings us warm and dry weather. Tropical maritime brings us warm and moist weather. Okay, so lots of rainfall coming in from there. And then finally, polar maritime brings us cold and wet weather. Ugh, that's the worst, I think. Okay, so check your answers, write down your descriptions of the different types of air masses. Okay, well done everyone. So the other thing you guys said was tricky was six-figure grid references. So there's a game here I want you to play, and it involves you guys having a go at six-figure grid references under time conditions. Okay, it judges how accurate you are, and you can keep going through, make the game really easy or make it more challenging depending on what you want to do and how confident you are. Okay, so go to this resource. I'll put a link in on class charts for you, but go ahead and play the game. I'll talk you through how to do it to start off with. So when you go there, click on, to start off with, game options. Okay, you want to start off with game options, and it will start off by saying, you know, do you want a time game? And it starts off at medium. I'd say go down to easy. Start off relaxed, and also what might help is show minor grid lines. So remember we talked about six-figure grid references as like decimal points. Well, that grid is on there to help you. Okay, so use that. Just to recap you six-figure grid references. Okay, so on here it shows you that there's a six-figure grid reference up at the top of your game. Okay, so here we've got 140081. All right, so what we want to do is to break it down into sections. The first three numbers are along the corridor at the bottom there, and 14.0 means it's exactly on the 14 line. Okay, so as demonstrated here. The second part of this is looking at the last three numbers. We've got 081. Okay, so we're looking along the corridor, then up the stairs. So 08 is here, and 1 we're going up one little box, and we're going to go along. Okay, so if we go along, we can look here, and then we put a line to help us, and where they meet, that is your answer. So you'd click on the grid there and see how accurate you have been. Okay, but that's the game, and we want to do it as quickly as possible to get as many points as possible. Okay, so can you beat me? Let's see. Okay, so I did 8 rounds of questions. I got 427. Quite proud of myself with that. But take a screenshot of your scores and see if you can beat me. Once you've done one game, do try it again. Make it a little bit harder, so a bit shorter on terms of the questions. Take off the minor grid lines and see how well you do. But hopefully this game will help you to understand six-figure grid reference and to build your confidence. Okay, well done everyone. See you soon. All the best.